Good afternoon and welcome to Cold Chain Connect. My name's Thomas Hunt and I'm delighted to be joined this week by Stephen Wing, who is the Principal Business Development Manager, Electronic Data Exchange at MilliporeSigma. And prior to that, Stephen was the Senior Staff at Digital Product Manager at GE Digital. Stephen, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Thank you, Thomas. I'm doing great.
Good. Just to kick things off, for people who haven't sort of heard your work before, and I know you speak at various industry events, give us just a bit of background about your career so far and your current role.
Sure. So I actually started my career in the aerospace industry. I'm a mechanical engineer by training, and then I moved into the energy industry. I really focused on, I'll say, continuous process control, where it's really looking at how digital data can help with optimization of the manufacturing process. And then I moved into the digital area in terms of platform solutions at GE and really looking at creating platforms to analyze large amounts of data. We built a lot of platforms to analyze output from aircraft engines and then really looking at predictive analytics and different things like that. At GE, I also joined their life science business, really focused on the product management operations. And I saw this opportunity that came up with MilliporeSigma looking at digital data exchange. So when I first joined MilliporeSigma, and this was about 6 years ago, the question was customers are asking for this thing called eData. That says, Stephen, go find out exactly what they're looking for and create a response to their needs. And that's what I did. So I created a program. We put together a platform. And what I found was that there were some industry standards in place, and there were a number of key customers that were really interested in taking advantage of having the standardized data sets so they can do certain things. And we'll get into that as we have the conversation. But I'm currently spending a lot of my time kind of looking at the future, right? Beyond that initial use case, what else can we do as a key supplier to the biopharma space in terms of providing digital data sets and services that really help our customers improve their processes. And when you look at processes, it can be anywhere from drug discovery all the way to commercial manufacturing and then even beyond that, right, in terms of getting data back from patients and so forth.
Yeah. Okay. So you were brought in around eData as a sort of topic to find out more, and then so you built the platform at MilliporeSigma. Is that correct? So you've actually developed something quite new there.
Yeah, so it's I think the existing standard that was out there was based around the certificates of analysis, which today is primarily a quality document. So we provide certain materials, and the customer is really looking at that document, that information as a way to qualify and validate that that's what they got, right, in terms of the raw materials before they used it. But what I found was that the creators of the standard that existed for this thing called eData were really looking at that same information plus more, but for a totally different purpose, is really trying to understand what's driving the variability in their own manufacturing process. So it's not just the receiving in of the raw materials, it's how it's actually impacting their actual production process in terms of optimization and final output of the final drug product.
Okay. How much has it been adopted then across the industry? Is this quite widely known, or is this just MilliporeSigma?
Yeah, so that's a lot of the work that I've been doing over the last few years. So in addition to building the platform, and what I mean by that is actually working together with a number of customers to go through proof of concepts, and then now actually we've moved into more what we call kind of more like the pre-production phase is actually production data, but at a limited scale, so that we can really iron out all of the different things. But the idea is that we want to make that more known across the industry and try to get critical mass. And so part of it is that that standard that existed was actually issued back in 2017. So there's only a number of customers that are actually using it in actual production, but those are some of our key partners in terms they know that it works and they've seen it work. So now it's a matter of making that more well known. So I've spent a lot of time in different industry groups like Bioforum, Nimble, ISPE, wherever people are talking about this concept of Pharma 4.0 and looking at the exchange of data between business partners, really.
Yeah. Okay. I know you've pushed for suppliers to share data in the same format, which is, I think, what you're alluding to there.
Yeah.
What problem are you trying to solve specifically when you say that, and why does it matter so much for pharma?
Yeah. Yeah. So without standards, what happens is that if you have just individual companies developing digital connections, everyone's going to provide something different. The receivers are going to ask for something different. So that's not sustainable. So in order to actually make it more widespread in terms of having everybody who's part of the ecosystem sharing data, you have to have standards. And why is that important? Because our customers don't just use us as a supplier, they have hundreds of other suppliers, and they can't actually just use data from one supplier to actually improve their processes because there's a lot of other inputs coming in. So you have to get the entire ecosystem sharing the information in the same format. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And I think that's part of the struggle for the industry. And that's kind of what you hear all the time. And not just sharing data between different business entities, even within the same company, where people have really acquired new businesses and they're all on different systems. And even the paper stuff that they're issuing and distributing, it looks different, right? So a C of A from within the own single company, different locations. If it was an acquired location, their C of A's are completely different. Different headers, different might be different information, even for similar products. So what the standards allow you to do is that no matter how and where they manufacture, if everybody provides that information per the standard, now the receiver gets all that data in exactly the same way, and now they can actually do something with it.
Yeah. So is that are you setting a standard for individual businesses across their supply chain to have a set format? I presume this isn't a standard for every company in the space to do the same thing, or is it? What's the
No, that's the intent, but it's not just one single standard. It's about really focusing on specific applications and use cases. You're not going to have one standard that covers every single use case. So it's very specific. So what we're focusing on is actually the commercial manufacturing space. So what that means is when you look at a product life cycle from drug discovery to process development to clinical trials to then maybe pre-production and then commercial manufacturing. Yeah, there's a lot of opportunities in every phase, and there's actually people working on every phase. The challenge that I'm working on is at the commercial manufacturing scale because that's the largest use of raw materials by our customers. So that's going to have the biggest impact. So you can optimize that by having the flow of data in a format that's easily accessible, usable, retrievable, then you can really do something with it. But even within the commercial manufacturing space, there's so many opportunities. So what I found with this existing standard, which is an ASTM standard, ASTM E3077 is what was actually developed by a number of biomanufacturers, some of the large biomanufacturers for this specific purpose. So that's kind of where we started because that was the standard that existed. There's a number of people who have invested in it in terms of developing the standard. So even if it was issued in 2017, there was a lot of work done before that, before they actually got the standard. And so being that ASTM is it stands for American Standards for Testing and Materials. It's actually a global organization. They look at and they have a number of things that they're working on that covers the biopharmaceutical manufacturing space. But I asked that exact same question. I said, why ASTM and not something like ISO or something, other standards organization? And so I joined ASTM and I actually got involved and I'm currently the technical contact for that particular standard. And the reason why was that as we got into it, I found that every 8 years, ASTM would look at their standards, and if there's no review and update of the standard, it could go away. Because we built our platform around the standard, they basically said the reason why it wasn't being reviewed was there was no volunteer from industry to be the technical contact. So I volunteered. So I'm currently the technical contact for that particular standard. But as we engage with the different customers, I've identified other use cases that we can develop similar standards for that complement that existing standard. So that's kind of the way that I see this kind of evolving, is that you can create additional standards, almost like a Lego setup, and that allows you to build additional ways to share information between business partners using the same formats, but not necessarily the same data sets. And you want to do it that way because the data sets are tied to very specific functions and processes. If you try to create one big standard, it's not going to be manageable, because now you have to get approval from all these different functions for totally disparate types of processes and systems, and you would
Hmm.
never be able to get everybody to agree. So yes, the idea is to develop these standards, make it known, show how it could be useful for people and valuable, and then build that critical mass so that people can actually do this thing called the digital transformation.
Yeah. And I presume they can sit along, say, your ISO 9001 or other things that obviously manufacturing. That's, as you say, the Lego effect there, and you're stacking these together. So yeah, that makes sense. You've talked about getting teams from PDF to usable digital quality information, and I think a lot of people think PDFs are where it stops, but obviously that's not the case. What is the biggest misunderstanding people still have about making that shift? Where are we on that curve?
Yeah, I think the biggest misconception is that we're simply providing the same information in a different format. So the standard itself, the 3077 that I've referenced, is actually calling out XML, but it could be any structured data format. It doesn't have to be XML. It could be JSON or something. The issue is that when people look at the PDFs, it really is just a format change from the paper. So instead of getting a piece of paper in the box, you can go maybe to the vendor's website and download a PDF, but it's still a true digital format. And so when you go to XML, and when you look at how the current standard is structured, and the main purpose of it, it goes well beyond what the current data is on a piece of paper. So the misconception is that you're just providing me the same information in a different format. That's not the purpose of it. The purpose of it is to make you think about a different way of working, different amount of information that you can actually retrieve, not only to confirm the quality of that raw material, but how that raw material can impact my manufacturing, and to even more progressively, to understand and predict how that raw material might create an out of spec situation, monitor that and control it so that you don't go out of spec. So that's much more than just simply saying, this is the quality of the raw material I received, and I just receive it in and I just use it. So when you start looking at the analytical part of it in terms of the manufacturing process, it's not the same people. It's typically the material science teams within the manufacturer and the process quality people, not the incoming quality. So it's downstream of the commercial manufacturing process from incoming raw materials. Now it's already been approved and it's an inventory. Now you take it out of inventory in your warehouse and you're actually using it for production. So now you're looking at, how can I use that information, which contains some of the same information that's used for incoming, but it can also provide much more. So a simple example is with cell culture media. What a lot of our customers have found out over the years is that just the tiniest of trace elements of different types of metals could actually impact their process quite significantly. And so for some processes where they've seen some issues with process variability, they might come back to the suppliers and they get that information. So it's a special test that you might have to do. And you find that you talk about like parts per million of silver, parts per million of whatever. And it's actually a result of the manufacturing process. It's not things that the supplier put in. It's just a result of the manufacturing. So some customers might ask for that information so that they can prevent that out of spec from happening, or that variability from impacting their process. The point is that the current standard, the 3077, allows you to put that type of information and share that type of information with the manufacturer before they have even received the raw material. So they don't have to wait till something happens and then go back to the vendor and say, what was the trace elements in that batch that you sent to me? So it's predictive and preventive maintenance, if you want to call it
Yeah,
that.
and
Yeah.
it sounds like it's very much analytics. You're looking at the information you're receiving on PDF, and you're drawing out that information. And then are you saying there's a human element to reading that information correctly, or can that not be put into a system or a process where it can sort of connect with maybe your MRP system or whatever in terms of flagging issues?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think when you look at the flow of the raw material and the people who have to look at it, so as an incoming inspection, you have the incoming quality people. So what they normally use is they're going to put it into their LIM system, right, the information. And then you also have the people who are really managing the flow of materials. So it could be the procurement, production planning people. So that's where the ERP comes in, but that's more transactional data, right? So you have a material coming in, which purchase order does this meet? Does this complete the purchase order? So all those are transactional pieces of information. But because we're a highly regulated industry, all that quality stuff has to happen also at that stage, which is being looked at by different people. So now if you have the information on a piece of paper, now all these people have to look at that piece of paper, compare it to their internal systems. One's looking at it versus their ERP, another one's looking at it versus their LIMS system. And now somebody has to input that data. So now you also have the chance of human errors of transcribing that information from that piece of paper into those various systems.
Yeah, and I presume I mean, you can set your minimums on your SOPs for your raw materials, and then the system can drive a lot of this as well, obviously. So
Yes, and we actually have, and that's actually the next use case or the next significant use case that I've heard is customers trying to do incoming inspection by exception only. So now you got the digital specifications for the raw material. They compare it with their internal specifications, and they only look at the ones that don't fall within their scope of their own specifications as opposed to looking at each and every lot that's coming in. So that helps save them a lot of time, and it opens up their folks on the incoming inspection side to work on more value added processes and challenges.
yeah, if you just obviously eData is a big part of what you do. Just in a simple way, explain to us sort of eData digital COA and what that actually is and how it's applied in our industry.
Yeah, so when I hear of the term e-data, that's more a generic term, right? So it's basically saying it's not PDF, it's not Excel, it's structured data. Now, the C of A, the digital C of A, is a specific e-data set. So try to look at it in terms of data sets. Data sets for what? Data sets to drive specific processes. So this is what it's all about. It's about what processes are critical as you look at your different operational requirements, right? From, again, receiving the materials, then approving it, and then getting it into inventory so that you can actually use it. So what we see and what we hear is that when you have that paper process, the receiver of the raw materials, they end up if they're missing the paper or the paper's ripped and they don't know where to go to the website and download the PDF, then what do they do with that raw material batch? They put it into a place called quarantine until they can resolve and get that information. So now you got a lot of these manufacturers, they have these huge quarantine areas either waiting to resolve the lack or missing data, or maybe they require to run a test on that material that came in. So they can't put it into inventory. So what's that mean? If they can't get it into inventory, that means they can't use it because it hasn't been reviewed and approved for use, right? Because of the regulatory and quality requirements and safety requirements. So so that's what we're trying to really look at and helping. What are those key pain points when you look at trying to approve those raw materials? So having the EC of A, not only for the purposes of what I described before from my analytics perspective, but now they can actually get the digital C of A, which still has that same information that they had on a piece of paper. And by the way, they can get that information even before they receive the actual physical goods. So they can start reviewing it before they actually receive it so that they can actually start that process ahead of time and hopefully minimize or even eliminate the need to put these things in quarantine and get that flow much faster into inventory so they can actually use the materials.
Yeah. And what sort of information needs to travel with the batch from the supplier to the customer? What do they need?
Yeah, so it depends on the consumable, right? When I talk about consumable, what I'm talking about is what are those materials that you need to actually manufacture. So a lot of the current molecules in the commercial manufacturing space, utilizing things like single-use technologies. They use a lot of different types of filters in their system. Some of the filters you can reuse, but you can only reuse it so much. The single-use components, by definition, you can only use it once, right? It's consumable. The same with the things like the cell culture media, APIs, excipients. These are all kind of chemical liquid type products which go into the process. But once you use it, it's gone, right? So now what you have to do is before you put it into your process, you want to know what's in it, right? Does it have all the ingredients of what it should have for that particular material? Does it meet the right levels? So that's the type of information. There's some basic things like pH and maybe osmolality or something like that that might have been established years ago, right, for certain types of products, and that's what people share on their certificates of, I'll say product certificates, because a certificate of analysis really relates to chemical type products. So any type of kind of liquid or chemical type product. So usually when you have something like a single use, people call it a certificate of quality or a certificate of whatever. It's just a certificate basically telling you this is what you have. So if you think of it in terms of a product at the supermarket, you turn the back of the can over and you see the ingredients and the percentages of the ingredients and so forth. So that's essentially what a certificate is of that product. So if you have a liquid product, it tells you this is what we ran for a test and this is the percentage of the things that we found, and that's what it is. So so now you have a better understanding of what you're actually receiving and what you're going to be using in your manufacturing. And so, the biopharmaceutical manufacturing process is very complicated, right? It's very complex because even for a product like cell culture media, there could be like 80 to 100 raw materials used to manufacture that, right? And now the cell culture media is now used in the manufacturing where the customer is putting in other things. So you get this mixture of all these different types of components. And do they react the same way, right? So do they mix together the way that you intended it based on the machine that you have, the bioreactors? So that's why it's so important to have the information and then to understand how your actual process works before you can really determine, is this good or not good enough, right? So, and the other piece of the value here is not only understanding what's happening with the current manufacturing, but the learnings could be shared back to like our R&D people so they can actually develop the next cell culture media or the next other ingredient that actually would help the customer more optimize their manufacturing process and their final product.
Yeah. And if you look back on your own use case or customers you work with, is there anything that you could share in terms of the kind of value or how you prove ROI from going for, say, PDF and paper into a more digital area? Is there any use cases that you can share that'd be interesting?
Yeah, I think the certainly the incoming inspection one that I mentioned, but also the analytical, but the process of identifying what that value is pretty straightforward, right? You basically look at your current process, you look at the hours that it takes, the time it takes for somebody to go find that piece of paper to input it into the system. And then you compare that to a digital, if you had the digital representation of that information, and how much time do you save, how much cycle time do you reduce, and that's an easy. And now you multiply, and that's why the interest and the focus on commercial manufacturing, because there's a huge volume of raw materials coming in. So now you multiply that, and you can see the amount of savings that you can have.
What sort of numbers have you seen? What sort of hours saved or monetary value have you seen?
Oh, it's in the millions of dollars for sure. Yeah. So it depends on the specific process and molecule that the customer might be looking at, but invariably they're looking at their highest volume products. So it's a huge amount. And then when you talk about from an analytical side and improving the manufacturing efficiency, 1% improvement in their manufacturing efficiency could mean billions of dollars because that's the impact to the final product that they actually can say meets the specifications for the patients and that they can actually ship. So that's why a huge focus on the upstream side and on a product such as cell culture media, because if you're only 60% efficient on your upstream side, that means all the raw materials that you used and you started with, you only output is only 60% of what you intended. So what does that mean for you? You've incurred more cost, and you're probably going to have to run another batch because you're not going to meet the volume of product that you need to ship to the patients based on the orders that you receive. So it's a huge impact, and that's why not only the efficiency of getting the materials, but how you use those materials is a huge impact. That's why they want this information. That's why they see the value of it.
Yeah. So we spoke just off air a little bit. We were both at Logipharma in Boston, a great event. You were doing a session, a panel there around the power of digitalization, analytics, and AI in pharmaceutical supply chain. You were on there. I think Juliana was on there from Pfizer and Priya from GSK and a few others. I wasn't there. I didn't hear the session, so I was quite interested to understand what the outcome of that session was and what the kind of findings were.
Yeah, I think in general, not just at Logi Pharma, but I think in all of the industry groups that I've been involved in, other events that I've attended. So I think the subject of digital transformation has been going on for a long time. I think intuitively everybody knows that digital is better than paper, right? But it's a struggle for some things, and it's natural, right? It's a human nature where you're saying, okay, these processes are working, even though it's paper. If we change, we have to get a new validation process. There's a there's a cost to incur to make any type of change because of the regulatory and quality and safety environment that we're in. So it's not simply just saying, okay, I'm going to change my process and I'm going to change my paper processes to digital. You have to show and validate that it actually works. So it takes time. And the challenge is that at the same time you're thinking about making these improvements and you know that it could be beneficial, we have orders, we have things that we have to get out the door. So, and in order to actually make that change and transition happen and happen so that it's actually usable, you have to have the operators involved, the people who are actually doing those things. But they're too busy using the current paper processes to get stuff out the door. So what I see as a challenge is how do you make that transition? So when you think about, how do you do that? And we saw the same things when I was in, aerospace and also in the energy industry. It's the same challenges. Everyone's looking at how can I improve. So you do have people, at the manufacturers who are looking at innovation, right? They're looking at how can I put digital into our factories so that we can get all these benefits. So they struggle with the same thing, and it always comes back to there's no standards that define how we should do this. So people just basically say, if we start this and we only do it with one partner, it doesn't really do us any good. So they struggle with trying to figure out how to do it. I think the will is it's hard to get to that point where you say we know that we need to do this, but then how do we do it and how do we proceed? Where do we start?
What's your advice there? That's a very good point. I mean, we went to trying to look at a big ERP, MRP change in our company, and it's very painful indeed. I think you're alluding to the same sort of things here. So what's your advice around this area for sort of logistics leaders in terms of how to approach that change management piece you're talking about?
Yeah, yeah. So I think you have to do it in certainly you have to do it in phases, right? You can't say, hey, we're going to do this digital transformation and it's going to take a year and we're going to pump all this money in and everyone does it. So that's not going to happen. So what you really have to do is identify the specific application and use cases that's going to make a significant impact. Focusing on, you have to kind of reduce the scope, if you will, right? So then you can put the number of resources and get the key stakeholders that are required. And then more importantly, you also have to show if that's successful, how does it build up in the midterm, in the long term, right? Because, and you can't go to top management and say, we're going to get all this done in 2 years, or you can't even say, I'm going to get all this done in 10 years and it's going to cost us X billion. They're not going to fund it. But if you say, give me this money and within the next year, I'll show you how this can work. And by the way, if this is done, now we can build on top of that. So that kind of Lego approach. Now I can snap this on, and in the midterm, we'll have these capabilities, and then we can snap additional use cases on. And at the end of the day, my whole ecosystem is fully connected. That's how you do that, because nobody's going to fund a 10-year, $20 billion project, because by then there many people that the CEOs, they've moved on, right? So what you have to do is show not only what the long-term picture looks like, but what's the incremental improvements that we can make that really impact the current business. And if you can show that, then they're going to be more willing to give you that next round of funding to continue. And I think that's the real way to proceed with this.
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense. And I presume most people in this section are either on paper, and that's a major problem, or they're too reliant on PDF and they're not using the information. So they're people at different stages, aren't they, in terms of
Yes.
where
Yeah.
of the process, and where they start depends on that, because I think going onto what you're just talking about, you need to be a certain level of digitalization anyway to go to that final stage. Can you go from paper straight to this, or is there a transition you need to make?
No, you can. It really depends on the data generation source, right? So when we create a C of A, for example, it's a result of maybe some testing that we've done internally, or maybe with a third party. It could be an in-process test. So the question is that test data being generated in a digital format, or is somebody just looking at the instrument and writing it down on paper? So you have to look at, if you look at your paper and you do a deep dive of your entire process and where that data generation actually is happening, and you find that it's all available digitally, it should be very easy then to create that digital output. But if most of the stuff that's happening, in your, I'll say upstream of where your data point or data collection point is still paper, then you have to really work on those processes. That's tough for smaller companies, right? Because they don't have they might not have the volume, and that's why most of the work that we're doing is actually with the large pharma, because they do have the resources, they do have the volume that it can make a significant impact, and they are investing in digital. But the problem is that you have so many different systems, you have so many different platforms that you could put in. So the challenge for the bigger companies is, how do we do this and not end up with a separate, platform for quality, another one for engineering, another one for supply chain, and they don't talk to each other, right? And when you look at the way that the process works, because of the regulatory and the quality aspects of the industry, these things have to talk to each other, because the logistics is in your ERPs and your MESs and everything else that you're doing to manufacture. The quality, you have your LIMS systems. Supply chain, you have inbound and outbound, where you have materials coming in and you have to ship to your customers. And what I've found is that a lot of these companies, they might have a supply chain for focusing on outbound, because they're really concerned about getting the final product to their customers. And those people don't talk to the inbound side. They don't even know they have a platform on the outbound side, which they can use for inbound control of materials too. And so they might look at a totally different system. So even for the same function, but looking at a different phase of that function, they don't talk to each other. And the reason I mention that is because as I'm talking to these customers, they really love this idea of getting the C of A data, but the question is, where do I ingest it? How do I get it to the right users at the right time? Because that's all this is about. It's about getting the right data to the right people at the right time so they can actually drive a process. The reason why the paper doesn't work is because the information isn't there. It's missing. It's not available. It's hard to find. So even though, as an example, again for the for the C of A's, we make a lot of our C of A's available on our website. So a customer, if they know the batch, they go to the website, they put the batch number in, they can pull down the PDF. But you know what? they have 100 suppliers. Every supplier tells them the same thing, that they're going to have time to go and remember, how to get into that place, what the batch number is, and then pull that PDF. So what they do is they contact their local salesperson. Hey, we're missing the PDF. Can you get me the PDF? So they don't even use that download feature.
Yeah. Yeah, no, of course not. No, no, I see that 100%. Yeah, yeah. If we jump to sort of cold chain specifically in data quality then, because you're going into sort of data there, which is great. When a shipment has temperature issues, should that info be included inside the digital C of A, or should it live in a separate trusted record that the C of A links to? What's your recommendation there?
No, it should really be separate because the generation of the C of A happens as the supplier completes the manufacturing of that raw material. So that's usually done at the manufacturing site. Now it gets put into the distribution, so we package it up, and if it requires refrigeration or cryogenics or whatever, then we're working with a third-party logistics company to do that. So now the creation of the temperature profile and monitoring of that happens after we've already done the C of A. So, and that's usually done for a batch. So if you do if we manufacture a large batch, even if it's for a single customer, and they say we have 5 different sites we want you to ship this batch to. Now the C of A is exactly the same to these 5 sites, but the temperature profile is going to be completely different because they're going on a different distribution route. So it shouldn't be together, not from the generation point, but as the receiver, when you receive it. So location 1 for that manufacturer, they receive it, they're going to want to combine that information. But where do they combine it? Probably in their LIMS system, right? Because it describes the quality of the product. You got the certificate for the batch, and now I have the distribution profile, temperature profile, and that connects with that particular shipment that I received. Now you want that together. And if it didn't, if there's no temperature excursions, then I have a document that shows that it's okay, right? It's in the system.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Okay, what's the best way or simplest approach to bring in temperature logger data or sensor data into a system, but making sure it's still compliance ready in your experience?
Yeah, I think if we start thinking about, again, structured data, if we look at some of the new systems, and I don't know if some of the manufacturers who or suppliers who are looking at temperature monitoring and the output of that data, what I've seen is graphical outputs. So if you say, okay, min and max temperature has to stay within this. If there's an excursion, then what happens? So ideally, you would want that information in a digital real-time format, right, as the product's actually being shipped, and that's comparing it to a digital max and min to say that did it stay within, instead of looking at a graph when you receive the materials, what if you just received an indication that once it's on your doorstep that there were no excursions, right? And now the digital data is already in your system. You've already collected it into your LIM systems because it just automatically got uploaded as the shipment was on its way. And once it's there, then you've already got all the data points that you need to verify that there are no excursions. Now, what happens if there was an excursion? So for that particular shipment, what if it exceeded the maximum temperature for 10 minutes and it only exceeded it by 5 degrees? Is it still good? Right. So now you got the disposition of that, and that's going to depend a lot on feedback from the supplier as well. But if you build that into the system to say that, if we ship this product and we've run testing, over many batches that shows that if you don't exceed by 5 degrees for more than 15 minutes, material is still going to retain its characteristics and the quality is still going to be there. Now you can use that as a way to disposition any excursions, right, digitally. So you don't have to look at the graph and say, hey, there's a little blip here. And by the way, this printed graph, I can't really see if it's 10 minutes or 15 minutes, right? You don't really have a way of knowing. So having it digitally gives you more accurate information that you can actually make those decisions that because if you just say there's an excursion, I'm going to scrap it. So it's a big waste if it could have been used and it's still safe and it's still usable by the customer. That idea of the consumables is because once it's gone, right? You scrap it, it's scrap. You can't recover it. They can't return it to the vendor and say, "Hey, can you rework this material you sent us to make it good again?" No, you have to run another batch. It just all the way down the line, it just creates more cost, and the time is going to be wasted, right? So
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, that's good. I wanted to get your future outlook. Where do you think we'll be in 5 years from where we are today and what we've discussed, and where you'd like us to get to, and where you realistically think we will be? What's realistic, and what do you see happening?
yeah, a good question. As I mentioned before, this idea of digital transformation has been talked about across the industry for a long time. But I think with the advent of things like AI, digital twins, and people are looking at that. But and realizing as they kind of dig into it and saying, yes, we want to use these digital tools, they're going to realize that they can't do that without the digital data. And I think that will accelerate the speed of how people are going to adopt standards for digital data, and not just the data itself, but the understanding of the data. So some of the other things that I'm working on is in the space of ontologies, dictionaries, right? How do you make use and understand these disparate pieces of information that you're getting from different business partners and also from your own internal organization? What does that mean? And it's not about just getting the data, it's about the data telling you that you have to do something, right? Nobody wants to look at graphs and data sets and then try to determine what that means. What everyone's after is really just tell me what to do, right? So if you use the analogy of like a copying machine, so you have a copying machine, and I think if you see a maintenance person come in and do something because they've been monitoring it digitally to say, hey, something's going to happen if we don't do this now. So it's just kind of the same thought process is how do we use digital to actually prevent the bad things from happening? And then as things are operating and things are moving, how do we make it as more efficiently as possible? And that's the whole idea of implementing things like AI and digital twins, but you can't do that if you don't have the foundation of digital data. So I see it ramping up, but again, focused on specific phases like drug discovery or clinical trials or whatever, commercial manufacturing. And there's people working on all aspects of that, but now you need to have standards to really define those data sets and for those particular processes that happen. And what you'll find is that a lot of this stuff is connected. So now you got to find those connections to say that, hey, if we can share this information from commercial manufacturing back to drug discovery, in the future, they can actually discover drugs much faster and have more efficacy and so forth because of what we learned from the commercial manufacturing and also feedback from the patients themselves. So it's a whole ecosystem and really connecting everything together. So that's the hope. Now, are you going to get there right away? No. But if you don't start somewhere, then you'll be still talking about the same things, 10 years from now.
Yeah, no, for sure. Okay. If people want to find you, Stephen, and how can they do that? And how do you tend to help people in this sector?
Yeah, so they can certainly contact me at stephen.wing@milliporesigma.com if they have some additional questions or they like to talk about maybe some of the opportunities from their perspective, or even try to get involved in some of the industry standards work that we're doing in different organizations. Yeah, so please reach out. And also, I'm on LinkedIn, so if they want to find me there, be happy to connect with them on that platform as well.
Nice. And are you speaking at any conferences this year? Have you got any planned or any that you're thinking of being at?
I do. I'll be at Logi Farmer again this year, working with them to identify either panel discussion or maybe some subject matter. I'm usually uh, attend some ISP conferences, but I'm not sure of this year. But right now, there's a lot of other conferences that are driven by some of the industry groups like Bioforum and like
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Nimble that I'll speak at as well. Those are towards specific projects and programs that I'm involved in some of those groups.
Perfect. Good. Well, listen, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. It was a really good session. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Thomas. I really enjoyed speaking with you as well.
Good. So you've been listening to Cold Chain Connect. My name's Thomas Hunt, and we look forward to welcome you next week for another guest. Thank you.